Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this executive meeting of Thursday, the 16th of December. Before we start, can I just say that this is our last formal meeting before the Christmas break. So can I take the opportunity to wish everybody a safe and Merry Christmas ahead of you on behalf of West Berkshire Executive and West Berkshire Council. I'm sure everybody will hopefully be looking forward to a good break, and I wish everybody the best with that. So my name's Lynn Doherty and I'm the leader of West Berkshire Council. As usual, this meeting is being held over Zoom this evening and with councillors present and socially distanced in the council chamber. So joining me in person is the Deputy Leader, Councillor Graham Bridgman, and other members of the executive, including Councillor Hilary Cole, Councillor Ross McKinnon and Councillor Howard Wollaston. Councillor Steve Arderwater is joining us remotely. Other members of the shadow executive and the leader of the minority green, apologies, Councillor Brooks. One member of the shadow executive is attending in person, which is Councillor Jeff Brooks. Welcome, Councillor Jeff Brooks. Other members of the shadow executive and the leader of the minority Green Party, Councillor Caroline Culver, are in attendance remotely. These members are entitled to speak and ask questions when not invited to do so by myself. The majority of officers attending the meeting and members of the public asking questions at today's meeting are also doing so remotely, unless they have requested to physically attend the meeting. The meeting is also being live streamed via YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Other members of the council are also in attendance in the virtual waiting room and can ask questions on any item included in the agenda. They'll do this by indicating electronically, and I will invite them to be brought in from the virtual waiting room for their question to be answered. Members who are not on the executive are not able to vote on any of the agenda items. Please note, the voting to take place at this meeting will run via the use of our desktop microphones. The results of each vote will be shared on the screen. The officers in attendance, either in person or remotely, include the Chief Executive, Nigel Lim, and Executive Directors, Joseph Holmes and Andy Sharp. Shiraz Sheikh will be the legal advisor to the meeting, and I am assisted by Sadie Owen, the clerk to the meeting, and Jake Thurman, who is acting as the Zoom host. Do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? I see no hands, and therefore can we please go to item 1 on our agenda, which is apologies. Do we have any apologies for absence?
And apologies from Councillor Joanne Stewart, Richard Sumner and Dominic Burke. And Sue Howell.
Thank you. Can we move on then to item 2 on the agenda, which is the minutes, and this is the minutes of the 18th of November. So I'm going to ask if members will accept these previous minutes as an accurate record of that meeting. I'm very happy to propose them from the chair. Is there any amendments, and do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Leader, but I haven't got any amendments to make.
Okay, I see no other hands going up before me. Therefore, can I ask executive members to indicate by voting on their microphone if they agree that the minutes can be signed as a true and accurate record of the previous meeting? We don't have any vote on our microphone at this moment in time, so just bear with me, please. Okay, there seems to be a slight delay there, so I'm going to ask for members to do it physically with their hands so that we can all see in the chamber. I take that as unanimous. Thanks everybody much for that. We will sign those as a true declaration, and I'll sign the approved minutes. Can we move on to item 3 then, which is declarations of interest? Has there been any declarations of interest declared? Thank you. None wanting to be declared on the evening? Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to item 4 then, which is public questions. I'd first of all like to thank the members of the public that have submitted questions to this evening's executive meeting, and welcome those of you able to attend to hear the answers to your questions and to ask supplementary questions if you have one. For those public questioners unable to join this meeting, I can confirm that you will receive a written response to your question within 5 clear working days of the meeting. Your question will appear on screen and will be answered by the relevant portfolio holder. You will then be given the opportunity to ask a supplementary question, but please remember that this is to clarify the response provided and not to introduce any new business. In accordance with paragraph 5.12.9 of the Constitution, where questioners have more than one question, only their first question will be answered. If after all other questions have been asked and answered and there is sufficient time, we will answer subsequent questions. Please note that the time limit for public questions is restricted to 30 minutes. And if your question has not been answered in that time, you'll receive a written response within 5 clear working days. The response given either verbally at the meeting or in writing will be published on the council's website. We can therefore move to the first question on this evening's agenda, which I understand it's from Mr. Steve Webb, but Jenny, it was submitted by Jenny Curry, but it's from Mr. Steve Webb here this evening. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Oh, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb, I'm actually going to, because Councillor Sumner isn't here this evening, I'm actually going to give you his response. I will say, however, that if you ask a supplementary question, I may well not know it, and therefore I will get you a written response to the supplementary.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So thank you for your question about when the footpath along the A340 between Tidmarsh and Pangbourne will be cleared to enable safe passage of pedestrians along the footway. Apologies for delay in resolving this matter. It is due to the fact that the work involved to clear this path has turned out to be more significant than was originally thought, and the work will need to be built into our works programme. This has been further complicated by recent capacity issues with the councillor's contractor. All being well, we expect this footpath to be cleared early in the new year. Apologies that officers did not keep you informed, but I have asked them to update you when the work is programmed. Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Webb?
No, not at this point. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much for your question. Can we therefore turn to question C on our agenda this evening, which is Gareth Beard to Councillor Steve Arderwater. I'm just waiting for question C to come up. Can we see question C on our screens? Okay. Councillor Arderwater, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you for your question, Mr. Beard. So we do recognise that there are issues with rural mobility, and the car club is a potentially great part of the solution to these issues. We're fortunate to be working with a pioneering partner in enterprise, and we do recognise it would be easy for them to just concentrate car clubs in areas of higher population where there is a guaranteed market and easier economics. However, enterprise are keen to place vehicles anywhere that demand can be demonstrated and or created. Nonetheless, any growth must work commercially for them. As a council, we will work with local communities to help expand this important service where demand exists. Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Beard?
Is Mr. Beard with us? Mr. Beard's actually not here or in attendance, so apology, I wasn't alerted to that. So if Mr. Beard's not here, he will receive written responses to the rest of his questions. Thank you, Councillor Arderwater. I wasn't aware Mr. Beard wasn't in the room. Can we move on to question E then, which is Councillor Howard Wollaston to Nigel Foot.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Foot. Under the Flood and Water Management Act 2010 and flood risk regulations, West Berkshire Council is the lead local flood authority, responsible for managing local flood risk from groundwater, surface water runoff and ordinary watercourses. non-main rivers. Individual duties and responsibilities are provided in some detail on the council's website, and I'll happily arrange for a link to the relevant page to be sent to you for clarity. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. If you can just bear with me. It is, if I can find it, I'm so sorry, just 2 secs. Could I ask you when the revised local flood risk strategy document will be published, bearing in mind the importance of this plan to Newbury in a world that is changing due to climate change? Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Blunt, I'm not able to do that, but I will get a written response to you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Therefore, that finishes our public questions that have been pre-submitted for this evening. However, we do have a set of questions for the public, from the public, relating to agenda item 6 on this evening's agenda. So I understand that Mr. Goatley and Mr. Pearce are in attendance and would like to ask their question. Can I just confirm, Clerk, that we have Mr. Paul Morgan, Mr. Vaughan Miller and Mr. Lee Dougal attending remotely for their questions? Are they in the waiting room? Right, okay, because that's, I just need to know who's in the waiting room, because if they're not here, they'll receive a written response. In which case, can I ask Councillor Wollaston to start with Mr. Paul Morgan's question?
Thank you. Question, Mr. Morgan. In answer to your 4 points that you've raised, number 1, no, this is a one-off payment to Newbury Rugby Club to improve facilities that pertain to the rugby pitches, such as improved lighting. The budget is not related to the creation of the new pavilion, 3G pitch, or the creation of the new step 4 ground. Question 2, a very simple answer, yes. Question 3, no, these costs will be ascertained following feasibility studies being undertaken at 2 locations. These pitches are also part of the 10-year playing pitch strategy. Finally, number 4, no, the sinking fund has a separate budget allocation and is projected to be spent in 10-year cycles when the 3G pitch replacement is required. Do you have a supplement?
Sorry, you came across very, very weak on your voice there, Councillor Wollaston. I probably didn't hear very much of what you said, but I'm assuming that you basically have answered those questions. So thank you for doing that, although I didn't hear it. But basically, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that you were looking at nearly £4 million rather than 3.3 million, which is a hell of a lot of money. And I just wonder whether people are aware within the council chamber and within the public how much money you're spending on something which is not a replacement football ground.
I don't know where you got the 4 million from, to be honest.
Sorry?
I don't know where you got the 4 million from, Mr. Morgan.
Well, I'll go through it for you if you like. It's at least premium.
I'm sorry.
He's asked me a question, Councillor Doherty. I'm answering it for him. So please give me the respect of responding to a question that Councillor Wollaston asked me. So I'll go through the figures for you.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Morgan. You've had the answer to your question. Councillor Wollaston has given you an answer, which was 3.351 million. What I think your question is how is his different to yours? Is that not the case? Because it needs to be a clarification on the actual question. Have we lost?
He's gone to attending. I'm just trying to put him back.
No? Okay, can we move on then? Can we go to Mr. Goatley?
Obviously, that goes then. Can I just check that people can now hear me? Yeah, there you go.
In response to Mr. Goatley, please.
Yes,
Councillor
thank you for your
Wollaston.
question, Mr. Goatley. We have robust governance arrangements in place, and that officers have confirmed that they are completely satisfied that such procedures would limit the successful judicial review action.
Do you have a supplementary?
Just thinking about that. Yes, I'm just wondering why it wasn't on the document. Every other thing on that document was mitigated, or your proposals for mitigation. The last one, the judicial review, which I think is actually quite likely, since it's not a replacement of the Faraday Road football pitch. I think the judicial review may well come, but there didn't seem to be any mitigation of it.
As I said, it was officers guidance and risk.
Thank you.
Dangerous.
Thank you, Mr. Goatley. Do we have Councillor Vaughan Miller? Would you like to answer Councillor Vaughan Miller's question on the agenda?
Thank you, Councillor. Sporting and have advised that it has no objection to the indicative business plan. The figures referenced in the question are highly improbable. To ensure best value is achieved for the operation of Newbury Sports Hub, the management facilities will be subject to open market competition in the leisure market. The cost of the management of the Sports Hub will not be finalised and agreed until the completion of this tender process in the middle of 2022. To answer the second part of the question directly, the answer is yes. We are providing a state-of-the-art sports hub for the benefit of West Berkshire residents. This has massive benefits in terms of not just sporting engagement, but also educational and motivational, and of course, general health and well-being, both physical and mental. You have a supplementary.
Yes, I do. So given that future administrations are going to have to bear increasing costs to mitigate the impact of climate change, plus ever increasing costs for social care, as you know, and maybe future pandemics and other demands, is it not completely irresponsible to commit to this spend when you could have a better facility with an extra training pitch, a full clubhouse, where access is way better for active travel and public transport, and which will not require any subsidies to be retained and will be retained by the council as an asset? So why not just cut your losses? Why won't you just cut your losses and back the superior Newbury Community Football Group proposal to redevelop Faraday Road Football Ground?
I think there's been several questions in there. I'm going to take the first one I heard, which was, is it not irresponsible?
The simple answer is no. We have a playing pitch strategy which runs for 10 years, which noted that there was a shortage of 8 3G pitches and also grass pitches. And this council is working towards addressing that strategy.
Thank you both. Mr. Pearce, would you like to come up? And Councillor Wollaston, would you like to answer Mr. Pearce's question?
Thank you, Mr. Pearce. I can confirm that the Sports Hub is designed to fully accommodate a Step 4 club.
Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Can I just, there's some clarification there, because there's a lot of confusion. So am I right in saying that Monk's Lane is not a replacement, but may be used in the future for replacement or part of a replacement strategy? Is that right? So at this moment in time, it's not being built as a replacement, because there's so much about this. Is that a fair assessment? At the moment, it's not a replacement, but in the future, it may be used as part of a replacement or replacement strategy.
It's certainly part of a replacement strategy.
It is part of it.
Thank you. You've had your supplementary answer.
So what was clarification? Actually, I've got a supplementary.
I thought that was actually supplementary, and it was long enough for a supplementary, Mr. Pearce. You sat through listening to all of this last night, this evening, and Councillor Wollaston.
Supplementary was the.
I think you had your supplementary, which was clarification on the question. Thank you, Mr. Pearce. I understand Mr. McDougall has now joined us. Can we go back, Clerk, to Mr. McDougall's question? There we go. Are you able to take Mr. McDougall's question? Is Mr. McDougall in the room now?
I am, yes, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mr. McDougall. It is a fairly complex response, so you may want to look at it in writing subsequently. The capital cost of the project over the life of the lease, subject to planning conditions, is projected to be in the region of 3.351 million, plus a relatively small premium payment to Newbury Rugby Club for improving other facilities on their site, such as floodlights, etc., which is still being agreed. The capital sum will be borrowed in the normal way to the Public Works Loan Board. The annual capital financing charge to revenue budget, including the repayment of the capital sum, is estimated to be £122,000 a year over 40 years using current PWLB annuity fixed rates as an assumption, along with the annual £35,000 sinking fund contribution to replace the artificial pitch every 10 years, as advised by the Football Association. The rent for the lease at 41,000 per annum, and the three items together provide a total annual revenue cost of 198,000. Final revenue costs will be determined from the tender of the new leisure management contract, which will be conducted in 2022. Do you have a supplementary?
No, that's good. Thank you. Are you able to put that in writing, as you said, just to confirm it?
It'll be on the council's website.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you both. We now go back to Mr. Morgan. Is Mr. Morgan in attendance for his second question to Councillor Wollaston?
Sorry, just shuffling papers. I've got so many questions, Stephen. Thank you for your second question, Mr. Morgan. The Newbury Sports Hub represents high quality development and value for money. This is in conformation with our playing pitch strategy. We are all aware of the council's proposals for the wider regeneration of the London Road Industrial Estate, which includes Faraday Road. Do you have a supplementary?
Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly, thank you.
Yeah, so it's confirmed that it is 200k a year that you'll be subsidising this facility for. And I don't think that's good value for money at all. So why are you not considering other more practical, suitable alternatives rather than this one only facility you're looking at? That's my supplementary question. Because it's not good value for money.
The council does not own any suitable land within the 20-minute drive time specified as a replacement in part for Faraday Road. So even if an alternative site could be found, either to rent or buy from a third party, there would still either be a revenue or capital spend. Further delays in going through this process will inevitably lead to further building cost inflation, not to mention legal and design fees.
Thank you both. Can we go back to Mr. Goatley, your second question now?
Thank you, Mr. Goatley. The simple answer is yes, provided we meet planning conditions and there are no legal challenges.
Do you have a supplementary?
That's a strong proviso. But I've been living in this area for nigh on 64 years and have yet to see the council do a capital project on time and in budget, unless you can tell me of any others that you've done. So I'm worried that you won't get anywhere near July there. So can you show us any time that you've actually met the budget and times?
That what I can say to you is that you'll see later on the agenda is a report to start the work on this scheme in January, and we have a 26-week construction period, which will hit July.
Thank you. Thank you both. And finally, can we go back to Councillor Miller for his last question?
Thank you, Councillor Miller. May I suggest that you read the Varsity Consulting Report again, and in particular, paragraph 3.3. This states that the scheme is good value for money, coming out at £2,879 per square metre, against typical costs of between £2,500 and £3,000 per square metre. It does not cite £2.5 million to £3 million as the total development cost of the sports hub. I think your confusion is that this report relates to the clubhouse only. The 3G pitch, stand, turnstiles and floodlights are all under a separate contract. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do, thanks. So we know that delivering the sports hub will cost close, not just building it, will cost closer to 4 million next year, not just the 3.35 build cost. The FA have indicated this money could provide 3 or 4 AGPs. So rather than ploughing all this money into a single sports hub in Newbury, which by the way is not tested yet, whether it will meet the like-for-like requirement to be a replacement for Faraday Road football ground. Have you considered an alternative using this money to build 3 or 4 of the 8 3G pitches needed across the district, thus bringing greater benefits to council taxpayers across the whole district?
I think what you're perhaps misunderstanding, Councillor Miller, is that the 3G pitch costs something in the region of £1.35 million to pitch. That is just the pitch. And as you know, we'll need changing rooms with it. We will need toilet facilities. So I'm afraid you're not comparing a like with like.
Thank you both. Thank you to everybody that submitted questions on this evening's agenda. We can now move on to item 5, which is petitions. I'm not aware of any petitions to be handed in, as no alerts to that. Thank you. In which case, let's move on to item 6, which is the award of contract to build Newbury Sports Hub. Councillor Wollaston, I believe you're going to introduce this report.
Yes,
And does that find a seconder?
Delighted to second this excellent scheme, Leader.
Okay, thank you. In which case, over to you, Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Leader. I'm delighted that planning consent was granted last night, Western Area Planning, for the development of the Newbury Sports Hub, a facility that Newbury and West Berkshire can be proud of, bringing multiple benefits to the community, the environment, and specifically football. This report recommends the approval of £3.351 million to construct the entire scheme and achieve the delivery of the #1 priority of the playing pitch strategy. There is a huge amount of detail in this report and its appendices, but I commend it to the executive.
Thank you. Members of the executive, do you have any questions with regards to this particular report? And Councillor McKinnon, do you wish to come in now?
I think I'll wait until the end. Thanks, Leader.
Thank you. Does anybody have any further questions for Councillor McKinnon, for Councillor Wollaston? Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Leader. Just a couple of questions. Well, primarily one. Is there a contingency for any legal challenges? And if so, is the executive confident that any legal challenges can be defended correctly without further expense to council for council taxpayers? And what advice has been taken on that, please?
Advice from officers, they can say no logical grounds for legal challenge.
Thank you both.
Is that taken under? Is that legal advice? Is that full legal advice?
I'm pretty certain that Councillor Wollaston just said the advice from officers. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Leader. My question's about the timescale and the cost. Para 4.9 on page 29 of our papers about the build contract says that the development should take no less than 26 weeks, i.e. 6 months from hopefully January. Cost inflation is explained in section 8 on page 33 of the report, and it refers to timing as one of the reasons for this. The whole project seems to have been done in a bit of a rush before we even know whether, in planning policy terms, the LRIE redevelopment, which is clearly the reason for the rush, can be permitted to use the existing Faraday Road pitch for housing. Yet it's understood the FA needs to see the new pitch at Monks Lane ready to play on by the end of March 2022, if Newbury Football Club are to be permitted to play in the Step 6 League. So wouldn't it be wise to accept that you're not going to be able to have a playable pitch in time for next season's football, and then ease up on the rush and the extra cost of this development, and perhaps even pause in your decision toward this contract tonight, and wait until you have the LRIE outline planning consent that you need? Because the biggest risk in all this, that at the end of the day, you may not be able to build the housing on LRIE, which is the only way you're going to make it stack up financially.
Firstly, could I point out to you that the Hellenic League, in which Newbury FC play, have already agreed that we need to have the pitch ready by July in order for them to play on it next year, and that has been the main drive. We're very keen to see both Newbury men's and ladies football clubs playing on the new pitch in the next season.
Thank you. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Leader. We've already seen some talk this evening about the vastly increased budget for this, which is the capital cost has doubled. But I noticed in the report that Sport England say that the grass pitch at the rugby club has to be replaced, and a couple of potential sites are mentioned. Could I have some idea, please, of the cost of providing this compensatory grass pitch? I mean, bearing in mind if the linear park in Calcutta is chosen, they'll have to expand or provide a new car park, and I would imagine new changing rooms as well. So I suspect the cost of such a provision is going to be quite high.
Work is being done on that at the moment. The current thought process, the actual pitch itself will cost less than £100,000, but there will be a possible need for some additional facilities on top of that.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Councillor Abbs.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, it's interesting to sit through the whole thing last night. I was a member of WAP, so looked at a lot of the detail. However, something came to light, especially toward the end of that particular application, that basically says that there's real concern on how the meeting came to a conclusion and how the vote was taken, and that is now leaving us open to challenge. Notes have been dropped to Nigel Flynn, Eric Owens, and so on and so forth, in fact, investigating this with the potential for, in fact, what should have happened in the first place, this being taken up to district planning. So I just want the rest of the executive to be aware that it's a very dangerous thing to do, to go awarding a contract when there is still doubt around the process that was done. And, you know, best one in the world, Dennis did the best job he could. But at the end of the day, it does not look like proper process was followed. Very, very, very easy to sort that out because the video can be watched.
Councillor Abbs, is there a question on this paper that we're discussing at tonight's executive?
Yes, I mean, of course, the question is why are you awarding a contract when there is such doubt? Is the whole thing just frozen, or can you still hear me?
No doubt.
Oh, okay, can you still hear me or not?
Councillor Wollaston, would you like to go back?
As you know, I was not attending in person the meeting last night. I'm certainly not aware of any irregularity, so I'm slightly mystified at the comment that's coming through.
Thank you both.
That's why I wanted to inform you, because it's not as slammed.
Thank you, and you have informed us of your opinions. Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. I'm just looking for, and it may be my misunderstanding or not understanding the implications of the phrase, the statement, and I'll refer to it in page 24. It talks of the delivery of the sports hub can be achieved with cost certainty of 3.351 million. Cost certainty. I say that may be an expression in these sort of situations, but it seems a rather bold statement. I understand there's a contingency of about 100,000, which doesn't look a lot on 3.351 million. Can I get a little bit more understanding of how robust that figure is? The cost certainty of 3.351 million, I'm sure Howard will tell me if that is an expression in these developments. And do we think the contingency is enough?
It is a common term, Councillor Brooks. It comes from our consultants who've done some detailed work. The reason that the contingency is relatively small is the intention that we will get on works underway by the middle of January. So the major risk, as I'm sure you're aware, is construction cost inflation. And if all goes as it should do, that will not be a risk.
Thank you. And if you may let me come back, if all goes as it should do, if there is slippage, if there are delays, that puts stress on it, not only the timescale, sir, but also the cost, I would suggest. So I think that looks to me, although you seem to think it's enough, I think that's a risk, that it isn't enough in contingency terms. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. I've got Councillor Marsh.
Thank you very much. I've got two questions, if I may. The first one is in the report on page 31.64, it says, with continued growth in the population, alongside the Sandalford housing development that sits adjacent to Newbury Rugby Club, it is important to have a viable sports facility provision to meet increasing community demand. Isn't that somewhat jumping the gun? Or do you know something about Mr. Gove's decision that's due in the new year that we don't? Because there isn't necessarily going to be any Sandalford housing development. It's currently in the hands of the Secretary of State, as I understand it.
afraid Mr. Gove and I are not quite that close. If Sandalwood doesn't go ahead, though, we are still going to need housing in the Newbury area. So it's one or the other.
Thank you very much. And my other question, which it may be more appropriate for the leader of the council, I don't know, but can I ask it now or?
Please do, because I'm only coming to everybody once, so then you have your opportunity.
Thank you. Given the importance of this issue and the very significant financial implications for the council taxpayers of West Berkshire, will their representatives, namely the members of this council, ever be given the opportunity to debate it? And I say debate, I mean as in not asking questions as we are doing now, but actually discussing it.
Councillor Marsh, as I'm sure you're aware, this council operates under the cabinet executive system, and the way that the governance works is that enables us to have these conversations as we've currently had them. I know you disagree with that, but that is the governance of this current council. Thank you very much.
Can I not hear a little supplementary?
Well, it's not relevant to the paper, is it really? Because it's starting to talk about the governance of the council as opposed to the paper
Well,
here. So.
okay, well, it's your decision. I accept that, but you need to be aware what people think of this and how amazed they are that
you've made that point several times, and there's other people with other opinions as well, I'm sure. Councillor Dillon, I'm coming to you as the final person that hasn't spoken.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I've kept my hand down because I knew colleagues were going to be raising the points they did, and I listened to Western Area last night as well, and actually, in terms of the way the vote was taken, I think there were conditions put on it that weren't properly tabled, and I think there were other members who had conditions that weren't able to table them. So I do think there is an issue with the WAP meeting last night, having sat through it on YouTube myself. But actually, Leader, what I'm really disappointed in is the whole discussion around this issue and how the administration want to funnel it off into one particular type of debate, rather than talking about its replacement as London Road. Half the time Councillor Wollaston says it is a replacement and half the time he doesn't. We've got concerns around the contingency level, as Councillor Brooks pointed out. We've got concerns around the way that the planning was dealt with last night, as we've already raised. And actually, Councillor Marsh referenced it just now, and he said it last night at Western Area Planning as well, that actually last night at Western Area Planning was the first time that members had a chance to debate this issue, actually but tied in the realms of planning. And so, Councillor Marsh, what I think we need to be able to do is to debate this issue more. Now, we don't have the power to debate, although the leader has that within her gift to allow it. And so actually, I think what we need to do is call this before OSMC, so it's an independent body of the council, where it's not under the control of the administration on where the debate goes. And I think that we have 5 days to call in a decision. And I think I'll be reaching out to my members and across the chamber to Councillor Marsh and others to see if that gains support. Because we need transparency on this, Leader. We don't need you only allowing one round of questions or one question off of each member. This is a huge amount of money for the taxpayers of West Berkshire. It all comes because of your dogmatic view on London Road, and yet you try to cover it off as something else that it isn't. So let's have it at OSMC, where we can debate under an impartial chair.
Thank you for your opinions, Councillor Dillon. It wouldn't be proper for me. We're not discussing a planning committee here. We are looking at a paper to award a contract to build. So I don't intend to make any comment with regards to that. Thank you. Councillor Culver.
Thank you very much, Leader. I contacted the chairman of WAP earlier today to point out there seems to be an error in the way that the constitution was used yesterday evening. The portfolio holder was invited to speak without any notice having been given. His name wasn't on the update sheet. Are you able to comment on whether or not the constitution was correctly followed at the meeting last night, Leader?
I can comment, and I can comment just as the chair of Western Area Planning commented last night to say that it was within the constitution. I have legal guidance to tell me it was within the constitution. So there was no reason why Councillor Wollaston couldn't speak.
Okay, that's not what the constitution says.
I'll take legal advice from the monitoring officer. Thank you on what the Constitution
I've read the
says.
Constitution. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, I'm going to go back now to Councillor McKinnon, who's seconding this paper, as everybody has the opportunity to speak. Councillor McKinnon, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Leader, and thank you to Councillor Wilson for putting the proposal so eloquently. This really is an outstanding facility for our young people, for our sportsmen and women, and will be so for the next 40 years. I'm particularly delighted to see that Newbury Football Club have given their full and enthusiastic backing for the scheme. And I think that's important to note. When we do hear some objections from members of the public, we've heard from various members tonight. I do find it a little bit odd to hear the charge that members haven't had the opportunity to debate. I think I've heard many different objections to this scheme in a variety of different forums, and we've heard them all again tonight. So I would certainly disagree with the assessment from some of the opposition members. And I think it's probably not being too unkind. I think we heard from the Leader of the Opposition there that perhaps this scheme is being used perhaps for political purposes. He brought in London Road, and I think it's not being overly cynical to suggest that might be the case. So in summary, the Newbury Football Club are behind it. I'm sure that all of our sportsmen and women and young people, not just in Newbury, but nearby and in West Berkshire, are going to be looking forward to using this excellent facility. And I'm delighted to second it, Leader. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. Members of the Executive, you have before you this evening recommendations as laid out in your paper at 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4. Please can I ask the Executive members vote by using their microphones if they're in favour of the proposals of the above recommendations. I've got one person that hasn't. I've got one microphone that's not working here. Councillor Bridgman's microphone. Can you raise your hand if you're in favour? Thank you. That's unanimously carried. So thank you everybody for that. Can we move to item 7 on this evening's agenda, which is
the wrong screen showing, Leader. There's a YouTube analytics screen showing.
So there is. Apologies. I don't. Oh, can you see that one?
Yeah. Okay.
You can see the vote in front of you. Can we therefore move to item 7 on the agenda, which is for the sector? Councillor McKinnon, I believe you're going to introduce this report.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Happy to propose.
And does that find a seconder? Thank you. Over to you, Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Leader. So I'm proposing here that the Executive approves the recommendations in section 2 of this report, namely that the lease is granted on the remaining vacant area of the building known as For the Sector on the terms outlined, and that the Head of Finance and Property, in conjunction with the portfolio holder for Finance and Property, which is me, will have delegated authority for the form of the lease and associated agreements, and that the Service Lead for Legal and Democratic Services will have delegated authority to enter into that lease and associated agreements. This lease is a very welcome development and will result in the whole building of For the Sector being fully occupied and generating revenue to support the council revenue budget. Commercial property income lightens the burden on the council taxpayer from the council's provision of essential services. In addition to the rental income, which will be detailed in part 2 of this meeting, the lease will also allow West Berkshire Council to avoid current service and vacancy costs of £206,000 per annum. The new no capital contribution is required to be made to the council by the council, and the new tenant has indicated that should the existing tenant of the other part of the building exercise their 5-year break, they may be interested in taking over that space too, which serves to mitigate a bit of future risk. All in all, this is an excellent result, and the precise financial terms will be discussed in part 2 of the meeting. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Wollaston, is there anything that you want to say at this point? I know we've got part 2 coming up as well.
I reserve my rights now.
Okay, members of the Executive, do you have any questions for Councillor McKinnon? No, does any members have any questions for Councillor McKinnon? Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. This is a small one. Councillor Brooks, microphone.
Councillor McKinnon said they may be interested in taking over the entire building should the other tenant implement their break option, take up the break option. Actually, the paperwork says in 4.7, the new tenant would like to take over the building in that event. So is it may like to or would like to? And the other aspect of that is, in the event the other tenant doesn't operate a break option after 5 years, which I suppose is in about 4 years' time, maybe a bit longer, a bit shorter, is there a risk that the new tenant, the tenant we're talking about here, the large blue chip company, likely to outgrow the building and therefore implement a break clause of their own? And maybe you'd like to give me a bit of understanding of any break clauses in this 10-year lease, please.
I think when any business indicates what their intention is in 5 years' time, I think it's prudent to suggest that they may end up changing their mind. So I felt it appropriate to say that they may wish to do so at time 5 rather than time 0. I don't think there's too much confusion there. I think the precise terms of the lease we'll discuss in part 2, Councillor Brooks, in terms of is there a risk that something happening in 5 years may cause the other tenant to reach a different conclusion. I mean, of course, that is always a risk. You can never predict that with certainty. But look forward to further discussion in due course.
Thank you both. Any other questions? In which case I go to you, Councillor Wollaston.
Leader, do we have a part 2?
Thank you all. In which case there is no vote at this moment in time because we'll take the vote in part 2. So can we move over to item 8, which is the Capital Financial Performance Quarter Report, quarter 2. And I believe Councillor Councillor McKinnon, you're going to introduce this report?
Yes, happy to propose, Leader.
And does this find a seconder?
It does, Leader, and I reserve my position.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. We on the executive are rightly proud of our capital programme, investing in the future of our district with new schools, improved roads, active transport infrastructure, outstanding new sports facilities, as we've just heard, environmental projects and more. The projected capital investment for the year at quarter 2 is £52.3 million, a forecast underspend of £4 million against the revised capital budget. But of course, as I said before in these meetings, that underspend does not mean the projects have been lost, merely delayed for a variety of reasons. The vast majority of these projects will be delivered in the next financial year. There is a range of individual project-specific reasons for the delays. The delivery of a new enterprise resource planning system council-wide has been delayed. That's currently at the feasibility stage. And other IT and digital infrastructure projects will be delivered in 22-23. All in all, our vital capital programme remains on track to deliver outstanding new amenities and environmental improvements for all of our residents.
Councillor, any members of the executive wish to ask any questions? In which case I'll come over to you, Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. And actually, I think I might be right in saying this is closer to actually spending the whole budget in year than we've had perhaps in other years. So from that point of view, I'll acknowledge that. I always try and give you a little, a little sort of thumbs up now and again, Councillor McKinnon. But I'm not concerned. The question I have is, how good do you think your forecast is? And I'll be asking you that again on number 9. Your 4.1 million underspend forecast, and it's December. Where are we going to be at the end of March?
Thanks, Councillor Brooks, and always delighted to take a thumbs up from whatever corner it comes. So a bit of Christmas spirit's always nice. That's a difficult one to answer, and I think we've had similar conversations before. The forecast is 4 million underspend right now. That's based on our best estimate about what's going to happen. It's not really possible to say, and you wouldn't expect me to say at this point, no, actually, I think we've overcooked or undercooked this forecast. That if we had a different forecast, then it would be in the report. So I've got confidence in the financial officer's ability here to forecast. Of course I do. Does that mean that this forecast will be hit at the end of the year? Of course, you know that does not mean that. But it is our best estimate at the moment. Thank you very much.
Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. A question to Councillor McKinnon, if I may. I accept, Ross, what you're saying in terms of your forecast is your forecast. But when was that forecast actually written down and committed to paper, because it goes through corporate board, for example. And I'm just wondering, has there been, so Omnicron, you know, has that become a live issue since that was originally committed to paper? And so therefore, you know, could there be a risk there around supply of workforce and obviously therefore supply of materials, etc.?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Dillon. The report originated in mid-November. I mean, it's subject to tweaks as it goes through the corporate cycle, as you might expect. But yeah, but by the time it gets to here, it's you know, at least a few weeks post birth. It's worth noting that the reasons for the delays at the moment are not COVID related. They're other project specific. So, you know, I feel the frustration, as I'm sure all residents do, about the fact that we seemed like we were emerging from the dark days of COVID, only to be potentially have this cloud on the horizon. So again, I'm not going to sit here and make promises that I know I can't keep. You know, the effect on the workforce at the moment is unknown and unquantifiable. Yes, it is clearly a risk, and I hope that when we get to do this again at Q3, that we don't see a huge impact. But can I rule it out? Of course, I can't.
Would you consider, just because of this unknown risk with Omnicron, the value of coming back to executive each month with just a snapshot of where we're at? Because, you know, we are going into a period of potential uncertainty and greater risk. So therefore, members could see the forecast on a monthly basis in the next quarter.
I'm not sure I'm able to commit to that right now. I'm absolutely fine with the principle of being transparent against our performance against our budget to members, both opposition and administration. So I'll take it under consideration, Councillor Dillon, but I'll make no commitments at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? In which case, I'm going to go to Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Leader. I think I'd reflect, given the comments that from Councillor Dillon and the response from Councillor McKinnon, that we are looking at a Q2 report. And therefore, it is already out of, as with all financial reporting, it is already out of date. We might put a finger in the air as to where we are at the moment, but I do think that the report, firstly, let's remember this is capital, and therefore, to some extent, it is perhaps more predictable in terms of projects than some of the revenue items, and that there are some fairly specific explanations within the report as to what is underspent and the reasons for that underspent and the likelihood and the time around that. Now, whether or not those particular figures are affected by Omicron more or less than might have been the case at the end of by COVID generally and Omicron in particular, more or less than the end of Q2, I'm not certain, but I do think that if you look at the specifics and you look at the individual items, you can see that they are things you can predict will roll over and will roll over in the values that are set out. And obviously, we'll see the end of Q3 report and we can compare, and then we'll see the final end of year report and we can compare again, and we will always learn from those individual distinctions. But I certainly support this report, and I am very happy to second the recommendations with it, Leader.
Thank you both. Members, we have a set of recommendations as laid out in A, B, C and D of the report. Can I please ask executive members to vote by using their microphone if they were in favour of proposal of the recommendations? I see that as unanimously carried. So everybody has approved. Thank you very much. Can we move to item 9 on our agenda, which is the revenue financial performance Q2 report? And Councillor McKinnon, I believe this is back to you.
Yes, Leader, happy to propose the recommendations in part 2.
And does that find a seconder?
And I'm happy to second this report as well. And again, I reserve my rights.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. In revenue, at Q2, there is a projected underspend at the year end of £0.3 million. So as is usual, that's comprised of a combination of forecast under and overspends across the directorates. In the People Directorate, there's a forecast overspend of £1.1 million. This is after the use of government COVID funding and service-specific risk reserves that were allocated to the Adult Social Care and Children and Family Services budget back in March, recognising the increased volatility inherent in the adult social care modelling as a result of the pandemic. The increased overspend this quarter actually arises principally in children and family services as a result of a larger than expected number of children with complex needs entering residential care. In the Place Directorate, an improved forecast position this quarter, an underspend of 0.65 million, reflecting additional income received from dry recycling and diverting waste from landfill to energy from waste facilities. The Resources Directorate has a forecast overspend of 0.4 million, arising from less income than expected from schools' insurance services, which we discussed at the Q1 version of this report a few months ago, and also temporary staff costs in the finance service. And finally, capital financing is forecast to underspend by £1.2 million this year from more efficient treasury management practices and judicious use of lower interest rates on short-term borrowing, as well as making prepayments to the Berkshire pension scheme. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. Members of the Executive, do you have any questions for Councillor McKinnon with regards to the revenue report? Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. Well, I acknowledge Councillor Bridgman reminding us it's a Q2 report. We have 4 months actual to go and we're 2 months into the second half. So, and as Councillor McKinnon said, it is a forecast. But he and I have spoken a lot about the accuracy or the need for accurate forecasting. And he knows that I'll be looking at this very carefully. Underspend at the half year of 300,000. That's what the paper says. Now, if it comes in at an underspend of 2 million, something is seriously wrong with the way the budget holders are forecasting. And so I put him on notice that I'm going to keep going on about this until the half year and the Q3 position is much more close to the actual outturn. And then I'm going to caveat what I said to give him a bit of relief, because I think his budget could get knocked sideways again this month, next month, and the month after. And I'll acknowledge that if it is. But if there is a manageable impact through the Omicron, I don't think it's an N, I think it's Omicron. If there is a negligible impact or a managed impact, I'll really be looking to see, can we get it much more closer at the half year than we end up with the outturn? So that's a question, you know, or a challenge, if you like. And he knows I want this to be achieved. And although he has to, you know, field my questions on this, it is about the practice in the authority of looking hard at forecasts. And I'm saying that with our new chief executive to my right-hand side. It is about budget holders taking a great deal of care and trying to get it right at the half year, not in April. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Brooks, for that. I'll start off. You said there that there's the possibility of the budget being knocked sideways with Omicron, and I'll give you credit. You know, you certainly did accept that, and you accepted those points when we were in the first wave of the pandemic. It would have been very tempting to really go and turn this into a political football, and you didn't do that. So I will give you the credit for that, and I think everyone's grateful for doing that. I think we've come to expect a serious commentary from Councillor Brooks on the financial papers, and I certainly appreciate that as portfolio holder. You're going to get a bit of agreement and disagreement from me on the rest of what you said. So you mentioned that you're constantly emphasising the need for accurate forecasting. Completely agree with that. And you said that you'll be looking closely at the performance against the forecast. You're perfectly entitled to look closely. It's your job to look closely at it and holding us to account about the achievement of our financial performance is exactly what should be doing. That's quite proper. Where I might just pick up on your wording slightly, you said that if it comes in at a different figure, you mentioned a couple of million, then something's seriously wrong. Maybe, but not necessarily. if something comes out of left field, which then knocks the budget sideways, it does not necessarily follow that the Q2 forecast, something had gone seriously wrong. If something that not reasonably in the contemplation of the forecasters came to pass after that. Now, maybe you think I'm splitting hairs there, but I think it's a point that's worth making. Otherwise, you're going to get total agreement from me on the need for accurate forecasting, and the desire to have accurate forecasting helps with robust financial management. So no disagreement there, and thanks for your questions again.
Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Leader. There's a couple of things on page 118 regarding adult social care. First of all, it mentions that the council-owned care homes have only got an occupancy of 76%, and that's after Walnut Close was closed. So we're talking about a very low, if you compare it to what we had last year, a very low occupancy. And I was wondering what the financial implication of that was, and also what is the council going to do to address it. The other thing is that it mentions there are higher client numbers than were modelled, 1,722 in September. But if you look at page 124, there's a very large jump of over 100 between March and June, and I wondered what the cause of that was. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Macro. With regard to the specifics of your questions relating to the adult social care service, it may be more appropriate for the portfolio holder for adult social care to get back to you with fuller answers on what the proposal is to meet the demand. In terms of the occupancy figures, they are lower than were originally modelled. As the report makes clear, it's that when clients are discharged from hospital a bit earlier than they had been in the past, their needs are often too high for the provision that we can give them. So that's some explanation as to why the occupancy figures in our own care homes are a little bit lower than forecast. As to what the service is going to do to manage those increased figures in client numbers, I think we'll have to get back to you with a written response.
Yeah, I was hoping though that I did note that the portfolio holder for adult social care was not present. I can't imagine why that is, but I was hoping that you'd be able to give the finances of this under occupancy of the care homes.
Well, all I'll say is that the overspend in the directorate is not primarily being driven by adult social care. So again, I'm not going to give you the precise financial details of the exact query that you've raised, but I'm happy to do so offline. The real overspend in this directorate is actually coming from Children and Family Services, but I'm happy to answer your questions when I have the full facts in front of me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. In relation to the resource directorate, there's a ICT forecast overspend of 88k covering staff absence, and in other places in the report it talks about agency staff coming in for there. Now, obviously, this forecast is a look into the future, and so therefore you would be expecting to stabilise your staff in there. But could the ICT portfolio holder give me any assurance around the confidence to make sure that we're moving away from agency staff and back into permanent staff? We saw how much damage that did to adult social care budgets years ago in terms of using agency staff. And then also there's I wonder if the education portfolio holder can talk about the buyback on the insurance, and that if there is a new product on the market, what are we doing from a strategic point of view to be able to look to generate that income again in the next financial year? Thank you.
Well, I'll respond initially to that, Councillor Dillon. I know that there's the intention of the ICT function to recruit permanent staff where possible, and to reduce the spend on agency staff. That is always a question of finding suitable candidates that are able to take on the role. So those efforts are ongoing, and I'm sure I'm able to assure you that those will continue to happen. With the insurance idea, this with the insurance question, this came up last time, I think, at the Q1 meeting, and it was I think I'm right in saying that it was a central government offering that was much more attractive to many of the schools. So I'm not sure that we are able to tweak that to replace that income. It may well end up being an adjustment that we make to next year's budget.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Leader. I've really got little to add to the debate that has just gone on. As Councillor Brooks has recognised, again, we are looking at Q2, and I think if we've realised anything about COVID, it has an effect on budgets. There's been a lot of fluctuation across the revenue piece as a result of COVID, not just as a result of COVID, but that's been a major factor in driving costs in different directions. In some cases, we haven't incurred costs that we were expecting to incur because the services just haven't been able to happen because people have been at home rather than out engaging with the services. And in other cases, our costs have risen dramatically. So the interesting analysis is going to be at the end of this piece when we look back and see how much COVID affected our budget and how much the government funding replaced some of that effect, but it's too early to make those conclusions. I will say that officers have had a difficult time in dealing with the finances of this, and I certainly applaud them for the amount of effort that's gone into making sure that we have been on a relatively even keel over the period, and I'm very happy to second the recommendations in the report.
Thank you both. Members, please can I ask executive members to vote using their microphone if they are in favour of the recommendations as laid out in the report before you this evening. I can see that's unanimously supported and therefore those recommendations are carried. We can now go to item 10 on our agenda, which is the performance report for Q2. Councillor Wollaston, I believe that you're going to propose this report and I'm more than happy to second from the chair.
Thank you. This is the Q2 performance review. So clearly, as with the financial ones we've just seen, this is to a degree dated information, but I think it is helpful. I'm delighted to introduce this report to be noted by executive. With a notable exception of some COVID-related impacts, and as an example, a slightly more lenient approach to business rates collection, the indicators are all looking positive, and our officers are to be congratulated, in my view, on their performance during the ongoing difficult operating conditions. This is a detailed and long report. I will do my best to answer any questions, but some will inevitably be beyond my knowledge. I will need to consult further. I commend this report to the executive.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. Members of the executive, do you have any specific questions for Councillor Wollaston? Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Leader. I found the Zoom hand in the end. Point I've made to Councillor Wollaston privately, but I will do it publicly, is that at the top of page 140 in the table about COVID-19 response, we have a raw number as a KPI for the number of COVID-19 targeted community testing assisted tests given. And I question whether it is right in that relationship to have a raw number. I would have thought that we need to look at that number in relation to the rate of COVID in the community and what's going on. We all know that COVID has fluctuated dramatically, and I probably know that more than most because I look at the numbers fairly detailed. And I would just question, I would ask Councillor Woodson to take this back to officers, whether having a number of, for example, in this case, above 200 is the right approach to testing our performance in this arena. Thank you, Leader.
Very happy to take that back to officers.
You're going to come back to Councillor Bridgman on that one. Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Every exec before Christmas, the last one, we always have performance report on the agenda. And we're used to the exemption reports. We're also used to me saying, can we get these reports accurate? And can we not have recycled papers? There's an exemption report in there, for example, on develop and adopt the health and wellbeing strategy with partner organisations, which says it will be reviewed at corporate board on the 16th of November, ops board on the 25th of November. It will then be taken to the health and wellbeing board on the 9th of December. And obviously we are here today on the 16th of December, not being given updated reports on which to be able to comment on. We keep raising this and we are keep being given reports that aren't timely in their response. And that's really disappointing, and something I suspect we'll raise again when it comes back up via OSMC, where we'll make a formal recommendation, hopefully, to the executive, which you'll adopt, Leader. It really disappointing when you get those. And also, given the amount of red indicators that you have on education, I would have expected to see the education portfolio holder here tonight. There are red around highways and transport, yet I don't see that portfolio holder here tonight either. So I'm going to save my questions for when they actually can be bothered to turn up and answer them, rather than ask an empty chair now. I think we probably all know where they are, but given that they're executive members on a sizable allowance, I think they should have been in the chamber tonight ready to answer these questions.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon, for your thoughts. What I would say is that we have 5 working days to publish these reports. So there's, we have to get them out 5 working days before. So those timescales are for Q2, and which we try to get them to you as quickly as possible. What I would also say is I believe that we've had a conversation with the chairman of OSMC around how we bring these to OSMC to make sure that they're coming through in a way that you would want to have seen through. And I understand that's on your work agenda. So I feel that report is covered. And what I would also say is please feel free to look at the attendance record. Pardon?
I said not when the papers are inaccurate and not giving us an update, Lynn. I mean, they're referencing meetings that are going to be held at the beginning of November, and we're talking about that paper tonight. They're just, they're not being updated.
They're Q2 reports that, they're previous quarter reports, Councillor Dillon, and then you get the next ones. But what we have said is we're looking at the timescale table of this for coming through to OSMC, and that was actually discussed at full council just at the start of December. Councillor Bridgman.
Leader, thank you. I think I would reflect on what Councillor has just said to say I accept an element of that criticism in the sense that I probably should have pointed out to the executive and to other members watching that, of course, things have moved on since the Q2 position, which this report reflects. And in relation to the health and wellbeing strategy that you point to, the health and wellbeing strategy has been agreed at Health and Wellbeing Board. But of course, as the leader says, we have to look at, as we've just looked at, Q2 outturn reports for both capital and revenue. We are looking at a Q2 outturn report for data, and data has to be put together, commented, exception reports have to be written, and so on and so forth. Now, we can argue till the cows come home about the timing of everything and how long it takes for things to make their way through the system, but they do have to take their way through the system. You can't just produce a raw report to a public meeting like this. And at the end of the day, we're looking at Q2. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you all. I just wanted to add some thoughts to this report because I think it's an interesting one, and I just wanted to pick up on the untargeted influencer measures, because I think there's a lot of work that goes on, and this is one of the things I think it's quite important to potentially take into OSMC is obviously we have these KPIs and they need to be addressed and looked at on a regular basis, and there is a concern. I mean, Councillor Dillon's mentioned the education one, and we all know that we're not getting the education data through from exams, for example, that we would wish to normally see in this situation, and one of of the questions I've raised, and I've raised it with the education portfolio holder, is what other measures could we be looking at in this interim period where we're not getting that information, because I don't feel comfortable without having that information. And I entirely appreciate that that is an exam-driven piece of KPI work, but therefore what in addition could we be doing at this particular vulnerable time for young people? But there is some real positives in this piece for me that I just wanted to highlight, because the economic development piece and the economic indicators are showing still that the actual there's strong resilience within the West Berkshire economy, and we're seeing good recovery. And I think that's a really good place to be. I'd like to thank the bid. We used our Welcome Back funding to give them the funds to put on the Victorian Fair for 3 days, and to see the footfall in Newbury back at pre-COVID levels is really positive. And I'm so disappointed that we are in the current situation with Omicron, and that we're now looking at a situation whereby we were seeing that bounce back. And I know that there are a lot of businesses out there that are now really worried. So I'd really like to thank our teams that have been making sure that those grants go out to those businesses and how we can support them going forward. So I know it's untargeted work, but it's really important work at this current moment in time. So it's good to see the KPIs, but I think we need to recognise as a local authority that there will always be things that we're having to respond to in addition to these KPIs. The next one, of course, will obviously be the vaccination booster programme push, to see what we can do as partners to the NHS to help make sure that we get those boosters going as quickly and as efficiently as we possibly can. So I think it's the recognition that while this report shows those bag of measures that we regularly report, there is an awful lot of other work going on. And I would just like to take the time, as it is the one before Christmas, to thank the officers here at West Berkshire Council who can tirelessly do that, because it's been another really tough year where we've continued to respond. Yet looking at some of those indicators, I think that's a pretty impressive performance, considering the current circumstances in which we're working. So I'm very happy to accept the recommendations of this report and put them before members. Can I ask that executive members note the progress? I don't think we actually need to vote on this. I'm looking at, so it is to note the progress of the council strategy delivery plan, that we've maintained strong performance in the core business areas. There's good results for the majority of measures relating to the council's priorities for improvement, remedial actions taken where performance is below target. So I would ask you all, I'm actually being asked to vote in favour on my paperwork, but I don't think I need to.
You don't need to.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, members, in which case can we move to item 11? Now, item 11 on our agenda is the members' questions. So I would like to thank all those members that have submitted questions to this evening's executive meeting. Your questions will appear on the screen and will be answered by the relevant portfolio holder. You will then be given the opportunity to ask a supplementary question, but please remember that this must be to clarify the response provided and not introduce any new business. In accordance with paragraph 5.12.9 of the Constitution, where questions have more than one question, only their first question will be answered. If after all other first questions have been asked and answered and there is sufficient time, we will answer subsequent questions. Please note that the time limit for members' questions is restricted to 60 minutes. And if your questions have not been answered in that time, you will receive a written response within 5 clear working days. The responses will either be given verbally at the meeting or will be published on the council's website. Therefore, can I ask that we move to question A on the agenda, and that's Councillor Alan Macro, which I've agreed on behalf of Councillor Sumner, because I've actually been involved with this particular question, to answer on his behalf. So Councillor Macro, can I first of all thank you for giving the opportunity to dispel some of the inaccurate reporting on this issue that's been circulated by the local press. Having been contacted direct by those running the service on the weekend of the 4th of December, apologies, I've just got a screen open, sorry. Having been contacted direct by those running the services on the weekend of the 4th of December, we responded by offering free parking for volunteers at the Kennet Centre Vaccination Centre in the new Newbreach Station car park. This was in response to the new Omicron variant and a rapid escalation of the booster programme. It's a way for us to express our thanks to them during this vital stage of the vaccination programme and to help facilitate this vital work. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you the feedback that I have been sent by the St John's vaccinator administrating this scheme. The email I have received says, I have received nothing but professional and expeditious support from the council in this matter. And my request for free parking for volunteers in the COVID vaccination centre was immediately authorised and set up in partnership with your parking manager. This matter is fully resolved and is monitored by the gentleman that sent the quote to ensure compliance and to avoid any abuse of the offer. Again, I cannot say enough for the reaction to the issue by West Berkshire Council and their continued support for the community and the response to COVID associated matters. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Macro?
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I'd like to thank the council for moving on this. But however, some of these volunteers have actually been spending money on parking to enable them to volunteer for some time. And so will you please consider reimbursing them for the parking charges they incurred before the free parking was introduced?
Thank you for your supplementary. And there's actually no requirement for those volunteers to have been spending that money because the government spent billions on the vaccination rollout. And I understand that both the Royal Voluntary Service and St John's Ambulance allow for expenses to be claimed, which include mileage and parking costs. This has been the case from the start of the rollout. Details of how volunteers can claim this is publicly available on their FAQs. So I would urge any volunteer who has not yet claimed to do so quickly in case there is a time limit on when claims can be made. Or I am sure they can speak to their team leader for assistance in following that process. Since the funding of this programme is received by those two organisations rather than West Berkshire Council, the duty to reimburse volunteers' expenses will also fall to them.
That will leave those organisations out of pocket, of course.
Those organisations have been paid for the work and services that they're doing for the vaccination programme. Okay, if we can move on to the question B on the agenda, which is Councillor Abbs to Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Abbs. Simple answer, I'm afraid, is no. EAG, or Environmental Action Group for the Benefit of the Public, is not a decision-making body, nor are its transport and planning equivalents. It is a cross-party confidential forum allowing for exchange of views and advice to the portfolio holder for matters such as development of policies and strategies. When developed, such policies will be consulted on where appropriate, and any significant key decision will be the matter for the executive. You have a supplementary.
Well, just point of information first, please, Councillor Wollaston. I don't think EAG stood for Action Group. I thought it was Advisory Group. But,
Councillor Abbs, we can't actually hear you in the chamber.
Oh dear.
We can now.
Oh, good. Yeah, EAG, as far as I was aware, it stood for the Environmental Advisory Group, not Action Group. So it's sort of something I need to know as a member of the group. Has it been relabeled or something? Anyway, that's not supplementary question.
That Councillor Abbs, my slip.
Okay. The answer doesn't make much sense because the question is simply framing around letting the public listen to the debate. Now, when it becomes confidential, which is why the EAG was set up as a Part 2 meeting, commercially sensitive information, etc. Totally understand how you might want to move into a separate. What I don't understand, though, I'd like you to explain why all parts of EAG are held in Part 2 and not just some of it.
I think you have to bear in mind that this is just one of 3 different groups. As I said earlier, my answer to your original question. There's also the equivalent transport and planning equivalents. And I really don't see why the environmental one should be any different to the other 2.
Because we're trying to take the public along with us.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Abbs. Can we move to item C, which is Councillor Vickers to Councillor Wollaston?
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Our officers have made inquiries and spoken to the Boundary Commission representative to take soundings on how a governance review will be received by the Commission. This is because we are required to obtain their consent whilst within a 5-year period from when the review of wards was last undertaken. The informal view we had was that this would largely be dependent on what the outcome of the Sandford appeal is on housing numbers to provide certainty. Do you have a supplementary?
I do. My supplementary, I've read the guidance on a supplement community governance reviews in some detail. I looked at this 7 years ago when it was first published, and again when the Sandalford Ward was created. And it is possible to take a single simple issue like this separate from a full CGR. And if it won't be done voluntarily by the district council, then it will be done through petition, which we will have to get up of the affected residents. Does the portfolio holder really want that to happen? Or do you want to just let it drag on and face embarrassment because it's going to do a full CGR? I don't believe is possible in the time available before the next election. I have 6 electors who elect 5 parish councillors, and you can't even get the nomination papers signed for them. It's ridiculous.
We've been assured this is not something that is remotely unique to West Berkshire Council. And we could potentially be spending a lot of time and resources undertaking a community governance review.
You don't need to. I assure you.
Councillor Vickers, could you let Councillor Wollaston answer your question?
Well, it would only be largely dependent on certainty as to housing numbers. And all I can say to Councillor Vickers is that is the advice we can give.
Thank you both. Can we move on then to question D on our agenda, which is Councillor Brooks to me. So first of all, Councillor Brooks, ensuring that we deliver the key strategic objectives of the council is at the core of my approach as leader. As an executive and with the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, we receive quarterly reports of the delivery of the council strategy to ensure that its delivery is rigorously maintained, as we've done this evening. Any loss of a member of staff can be disruptive, as they will have built up specific knowledge as to how the council works. The council's workforce strategy recognises the challenge of succession planning, and proposals are coming forward to further support this. All services look at key areas of resilience. Do you have a supplementary?
We were looking at the workforce strategy at Personnel Committee, and I'd like to think that we'd be able to look at succession plans as well within that for key members of staff. Would you agree that they could come before the Personnel Committee, please?
If you're talking about individuals' personnel records, because I was a little bit worried there where you actually have named an officer.
I can clarify. Any department should be looking at the contingency for somebody to leave, whether they retire or not, succession planning. You know the term, I know the term. And it's fair for Personnel Committee to know they're in place within departments. Not individuals per se, although if somebody does give an indication they're going to retire in 12 months, then it's reasonable to look at that in isolation. But the general point of succession planning, I think, should be coming through Personnel Committee, the general point.
Councillor Brooks, I'm more than happy to take this up with our new HR manager. I know that they're currently reviewing all policies and procedures and looking very in detail at the workforce strategy, as is our new chief executive. So I'm very happy to come back to you once we've had the opportunity to have that conversation and raise that for you. Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Can we move on then to item E, or question E, sorry, which is Councillor Macro to Councillor Bridgman, I believe, is going to answer this one.
Indeed. And Councillor Macro, the question was addressed to Portfolio of Our Social Care. I'm answering it, but if you have a supplementary, obviously it may have to be in writing. We'll see if you do have one and whether I can answer it. There is a concern the question could be read as saying that this council needs to improve its care planning and support options, and that the extra funding would allow that. Now, If that was what was being suggested, I would disagree. I think we're good at planning support and care for those who are entitled to it. Now, the white paper certainly advocates change, and such change, in particular, the cap on personal care costs, looks like it will introduce new clients to adult social care and needing support. However, we don't yet know how many that might be. The devil will be definitely in the detail on this one. So far as finances are concerned, in simple terms, it's too early to give more than a general answer. We're still waiting for details of the local government settlement 22-23, and that will set out precisely how much we'll receive in both general and social care funding. And therefore, at the present time, we don't know, in the words of your question, how much the extra funding will allow. Certainly, the plan to invest £5.4 billion nationally into adult social care over the next 3 years should deal with the principal changes that are planned to be introduced, including that cap on personal care costs and the equalisation of care costs across the sector. Now, what I don't want to give anyone the impression is that officers are just sitting on their hands waiting for this announcement to come through and the funding to be announced, or indeed to see the effect of those announcements. There is a project across multiple teams to prepare for all eventualities, but fundamentally, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, we're waiting for the precise rules, and more to the point, to understand what the funding is going to look like in order to assess what changes there will be and how the council should respond to them. Do you have a supplementary?
Councillor Macro, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, in the executive summary of the white paper, it mentions more than 70 million to increase the support. Would you not agree with me that 70 million is not going to go very far when spread across all local authorities with adult social care responsibilities?
I don't recognise that figure. I'm happy to look at, if you'd like to point me and Councillor Stewart at those precise words, happy to look at them. But certainly in preparing the answer to this question, I looked at the guidance in the white paper, and as I say, the number across social care in 3 years is 5.4 billion. So those numbers differ somewhat, but please point us at the numbers you're quoting, and we'll do our best to answer the question.
As I said, it's in the executive summary, so it's not very far down the white paper.
Well, please point us at it.
Thank you both. Can we move then to question F, which is Councillor Pattenden to Councillor Wollaston?
Thank you, Councillor Pattenden.
Is Councillor Pattenden here?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Leader.
Oh, right. Okay, thank you. It's looking a little dark there, Councillor Pattenden.
Not anymore. I'm in bright lights. Thank you.
I have already answered this in respect of a public question earlier this evening. Would you like me to repeat the answer or accept it as read?
I'm happy for you to repeat the answer. Thank you, Councillor Wollaston.
The capital cost of the project over the life of the lease, subject to planning conditions, is projected to be in the region of £3.351 million, plus a relatively small premium payment to Newbury Rugby Club for improving other facilities on their sites, such as floodlights, etc., which is still being agreed. The capital sum will be borrowed in the normal way through the Public Works Loan Board. The annual capital financing charge to revenue budget, including repayment of the capital sum, is estimated to be about £122,000 a year over the 40 years, using current PWLB annuity fixed rates as an assumption, along with the annual £35,000 sinking fund contribution to replace the artificial pitch every 10 years, as advised by the Football Association, and the rent for the lease at £41,000 per annum. All three items provide a total annual revenue cost of £198,000. Final revenue costs will be determined following the tender of the new leisure management contract, which will be conducted in 2022. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. You'll know from the previous discussions that from our side, we don't think that that's good value for money, and we think that money would be better spent elsewhere or on current services. So, would you agree that there would need to potentially be corresponding rises in council tax or cuts in services in order to support those costs that you've just outlined, particularly the revenue costs?
I hope not, Councillor Paddington. To put this into perspective, the annual budget for this council is over £140 million. So 200,000 a year is not exactly a massive element which should affect the council tax rate.
Thank you both. Can we move on then to question G on our agenda, which is Councillor Cole to Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Leader. And thank you for your question, Councillor Cole. West Berkshire Council remains focused on delivering on its commitments on both the environment and its newly adopted social value policy. We will be happy to review the possibility of installing ground source heating at the Chestnut Walk development at our next housing board. Pending the findings of this review, the board will then make a recommendation to Homes for West Berkshire, the joint venture between Sovereign Housing and this council, which is progressing this development. I'm confident that we will be able to achieve the highest possible environmental standards on this site through this joint venture. The Sovereign Housing Association's sustainability statement relating to the planning application for Chestnut Walk demonstrates their commitment to work with us to achieve our collective environmental ambitions relating to carbon neutrality and social value. Do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you very much for that. Yes, I do. Another aspect of the implications of our new social value policy was raised as part of Hungerford Town Council's presentation on the planning aspects of the Chestnut Walk development last night. And Councillor Down asked if we could also look at minimising the cost of living for residents of new social or affordable housing by covering such issues as powering charge points for electric cars from house power rather than from expensive commercially provided public power where possible. Would you be happy to include that element?
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Yes, we're striving to progress our environmental ambitions relating to the newly adopted social value policy, and we'll consider making a recommendation to Homes for West Berkshire about the possibility of electrical vehicle charging to enable the use of electric cars or vehicles for Chestnut Walk, because I agree with you. I think it is extremely important that we ensure that the residents of Chestnut Walk have a reasonably priced access to electric vehicle charging points.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. And that concludes the members' questions for this evening. So thank you all for your questions. Can we move to item 12, which is the exclusion of the press and public? I'm happy to move this motion. Does that find a seconder?
It does.
Can I see a show of physical hands for all those in favour?